All right. What's up, everybody? I am back to continue reviewing the discussion on Mindscape between Sean Carroll and Russ Shafer-Landau. The last stream was a bit of a mess. We had a bunch of interruptions and stuff going on and all kinds of it was rough. But I am nevertheless going to continue where we left off. So let's get into it. I will announce Lance Loot after we play a bit of this, and yeah, let's get rolling. And we'll speed it up just a little bit. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's too much. Let's do there.
And yet, some of my best friends are physicists and cosmologists, and not all of them are characterized by enormous amounts of humility, interestingly enough. No, I think that I more or less agree with everything you're saying. As I said, I think that the constructivist has to bite the bullet about the fact that even in good faith, and we can come up with less repugnant versions of the fact that people thinking in good faith, either individuals or groups of individuals, societies, might end up constructing versions of morality that I find deeply distasteful, and that's something that the constructivist has to live with. On the other side, the constructivist is going to say, but
yeah, it's a little strange. There's not really a bullet to bite here. So realists are simply trading one issue for another. In the case of the realists, they would just have to accept that people may or may not reach different conclusions about what the stance-independent moral facts are, and they might find those facts repugnant or disgusting or terrible or not true. The only difference is that for the constructivist, the way in which people may not be, the only way it really that differs is that the constructivist does not think that people with rival constructed moral standards are stance independently wrong. That's the only difference. So, if you are still okay with imposing your moral standards on societies that have different standards than you, there's no real practical implication. Think about it from the realist perspective. So you're a moral realist and you think it stands independently wrong to torture people or to keep slaves. And then you encounter a society that tortures people or keeps slaves. Okay, so they're acting out of accord with the stance independent moral facts, assuming you believe you know what those facts are, and you believe this morally requires you to try to convince them to stop owning slaves or stop torturing people. Maybe they refuse, maybe they're violent. You may have to intervene and attempt to free their slaves or, try to stop them from torturing people. That might even result in a war, and you might be justified in carrying out that war. Okay, and how is this different for the constructivist? So the constructivist thinks moral systems, they're not stance independently right or wrong, but maybe they are constructed through some sort of social process. And your society constructed one moral system, this society constructed another moral system. And according to the standards of that society, torture and slavery are okay. All right. Now, if according to your society and your constructed society standards, it's not okay for other societies to own slaves or torture people, now you would do exactly the same thing as the realist. You might try to persuade them. You might try to intervene to stop them. And if it comes to war, you might engage in war. There's no practical difference for the constructivist. So what bullet are they biting? I'm deeply puzzled at anti-realists being so willing to make concessions and bite bullets when there's no concessions to make, none of any practical substance, and no bullets to bite. There's no bullet here. There isn't a bullet here.
But, so one version of constructivism might say, but the world is out there and it does things and I can do experiments on it, and morality is not out there. So you, moral realist, why don't you make the positive case for something that is objectively true there?
Oh, good. Thanks. So one, my naturalist realist brethren will do that in one way, and I'll do it in a different way. The naturalist will go out and say, yeah, we can do experiments of a kind because moral facts are just a species of natural fact, and that's not my kind of view. I think one important reason.
All right, Medcos says that they can't hear anything. Is anyone else? Can you confirm whether you can hear or not? Should be working. While I'm at it, I'll give out the Lance Loot while we confirm whether we have an audio stuff. Yeah, okay, it might be something wrong on your end. So Mike Shivak, you get 1,000 Lance Loot. Sneer, you get 500. Sneer also says I'm still saving Lance Loot for the bribe to make you like cats. Did I say I dislike cats? I mean, I'm more of a dog person. I don't know what exactly I said about cats. And then Medcos, you can't hear me. So I don't know if you'll hear this, but you get 250 Lance Loot. Andrew Moy says a potential defense of bullet biting is that these anti-realists actually do have realist intuitions, so they do feel uncomfortable with the consequences of anti-realism. That may be so, but and I do have a very big blog post coming out on this, probably today, actually. If not, then it'll go out tomorrow. I'm still in the process of editing it. So one of the things I talk about is the supposed implications or the consequences of anti-realism. So in this case, if you're a constructivist that has no qualms about imposing, if you're a consequentialist that has no qualms about imposing your moral standards on others, what are the negative implications of being a constructivist rather than an anti-realist? Like any practical consequences. So the implication is you're not a realist, and what follows from that? What makes you so uncomfortable about that? Some people might say, well, then you're not justified in imposing your standards on others. Okay. And why are you uncomfortable about that? Am I justified in preferring one type of food over another? If I like strawberry ice cream more than vanilla, I'm not, it doesn't make any sense to me to think that I'm justified in that. It's just not an appropriate target of judgment for justification or not. And nevertheless, I'm not uncomfortable about eating strawberry ice cream. And if I also prefer that people not own slaves and am willing to impose that standard on people that practice slavery, I don't have any qualms about that. I have zero. So if people feel like, okay, I'm not a realist, but as a result of that, I have a guilty conscience if I impose my standards on others, that's a matter of talking to a therapist. It's not a matter of a philosophical position. Too bad if you feel uncomfortable. Like, why do you feel uncomfortable? What is the problem? So, again, you could always pose this question to people that are realists or have realist intuitions. Well, sorry, this really only works for realists, but you could ask them, to the realist, what if realism isn't true? Are you going to stop caring about slavery? Are you going to stop caring about genocide? Are you going to stop caring about your family? I don't not care about those things. I'm still against bad things. I'm still in favor of good things. If the realist would change, why would they change? And in what way would they change? And if so, maybe that's an issue for the realist and not a problem for anti-realism. And as for the constructivist, do they think something would be different if they were a realist? Would they feel more comfortable? If so, why? Why would you feel more comfortable? I don't need the universe's approval to be against someone torturing babies for fun. If realism affirms that that's bad, okay. But if it didn't, I'm still against baby torture just as much as I would be if realism are true. The realism just strikes me as completely superfluous. Why would you give the faintest whiff of shit whether moral realism is true when it comes to your attitude towards baby torture? I don't want people torturing babies for fun, period. If realism agrees or disagrees with me about that, I don't care. I don't care. Why would you care? I really want to hear from realists that care about whether it's it would make a difference whether that stands independently true. Why would you care? I don't see like the discomfort as being like, what is it motivated by? It's very strange. So yeah, they can say that if they have the realist intuitions. But the thing is, in my case, I don't even have those. Like, biting a bullet, it'd be biting a bullet for me to accept realism, because then I would be accepting something radically at odds with how I'm disposed to think. So yeah, the bullet biting still doesn't make sense, even on that view, as far as I could tell. So, provided it's not something internal to the person. If it really is internal, as long as the person says, "Look, it really does make me uncomfortable," I feel like I'm conceding something. Fair enough, but I question even that. Maybe that sense of conceding ground or biting bullets is itself the result of some sort of confusion or error about the supposed implications of anti-realist views that just aren't real implications.
Reason to hold the sort of non-naturalist view I do, and it's the one that sets it up for criticism. I mean, there are a lot of elements in my view that set it up for criticism, but this one is something that was just beneath the surface in the conversation we've been having over the last 10 or 15 minutes. And that is a commitment to what I'll call the normative authority of morality. And the way I can, perhaps the best way to explain that is by contrast with the view that you've been you've been advocating. So if you take, this is not to do down constructivism, but just to highlight what I regard as a feature of non-naturalism. And that is, suppose you've got a view of constructivism, the sort that you've just been describing, and you're led to say, well, yeah, some people do it this way, some people do it that way. These different ways are just different. They're not better or worse than one another, at least so long as they're equally coherent, because there's no objective measure by which to measure the superiority or inferiority of one coherent moral code over another. And then that leads, as you've forthrightly allowed, that leads you to say, well, so if you've got a morality that condones female inferiority or chattel slavery, I'm going to try to argue them out of it, but I can't say that that moral view is inferior to mine. It's just different from mine. I'm not now focusing on what I regard as the problematic nature of that implication, but instead a different one, and that is that if you've got a view like that, then it seems to sap morality of what I call normative authority. Normative is just a fancy word that philosophers use to do with like reason giving. I think that there are powerful reasons to comply with moral requirements and moral prohibitions. But if you have a view according to which morality is created by us and either strongly diminished or, in fact, non-existent. If you think about it, think about the simple sort of cultural relativism that I was discussing earlier, according to which morality is a cultural byproduct. Morality is just that set of norms that are either directly endorsed by a culture or that are implied by those endorsements. Then you might say, well, imagine you're an iconoclast in a culture that is very inegalitarian, very intolerant, and you say, you know what? My parents believe that we should treat these other folks as inferiors. All my neighbors do, and that's what my teacher taught me. But I think that all human beings are, at a fundamental level, moral equals to one another. And their skin color, their sex, their gender, their religious beliefs, that's irrelevant in the determination of how much respect and dignity a person deserves. Suppose you had an iconoclast who believed something like that. On the version of relativism I'm describing, that person would be making a very deep moral error.
Yeah. So, the kind of relativism he's describing is one that the error, the problem with it is coming from a perspective according to which what you should or shouldn't do isn't reducible to your own goals, desires, and values. In fact, the whole reason why it would be an error to be iconoclastic and be in favor of equality is because your culture determines what's right and wrong, and you're going against your culture. Since your culture determines what's right and wrong, you're doing something morally wrong in favoring equality or whatever it is, we, the people examining this hypothetical scenario, consider good. And the impression you're supposed to get from that is, well, equality is good. And so it's kind of objectionable for there to be a meta-ethical view that tells you that a person that favors equality and wants to overcome misogyny and fight against inequality and injustices, on our view, that they're doing something wrong. Sure, I'm cool with that. So reject that type of relativism. But know that what's objectionable about that type of relativism, ironically, and I often call views like this is actually some type of agent culture relativism. I call these kinds of views a la carte realism, because what they end up, and they're not really types of realism. These are genuinely types of anti-realism because they hold that there are stance-dependent moral facts. It's just that in this case, the facts depend on the stances of cultures rather than individuals. I call these a la carte realism because the way in which they impose themselves on you is external to your own goals and desires. I mean, note that he just was objecting to anti-realist views by saying that they lack authority. But if this person is doing something wrong and they shouldn't be going against their culture, and so they're doing something bad because it's inconsistent with their goals, they're doing something bad because their goals and desires are inconsistent with the standards of their culture, to the extent that those cultural relative facts have some authority over what they should or shouldn't do, that's exactly the kind of authority I don't think exists. I don't believe in the type of normative authority that Russ Shafer-Landau is advocating for on realist grounds. In other words, I don't believe that there are normative facts that are not reducible to facts about my goals and desires that dictate or determine what I ought to do independent of my goals and desires. I don't think there's anything like that. And so if the realist says there's facts about what's morally right or wrong that are stance independent, there are the facts, normative facts about what you should or shouldn't do, and they don't depend on anybody's stances or goals or desires. And I don't think there's those. But I also don't think that there's facts about, like, if my culture favors something, I am obliged to comply with my culture standards, independent of whether I want to do that. And so, and if I were obligated to do so, I would be subject to a type of normative authority that I don't acknowledge as an anti-realist. Now, it's possible as an anti-realist to believe in the type of ephemeral, weird normative authority that Russ Shafer-Landau believes in that stems from a realist framework. In this case, the normative authority wouldn't stem from stance-independent moral facts. It would stem from stance-dependent moral facts. I find that about as objectionable as I find the stance-independent moral facts. In other words, when I go about acting and deciding what to do, I act on my goals and values. If there are stance-independent moral facts about what I should or shouldn't do, I don't care. Not going to comply with them. If there are stance-dependent cultural facts about what my culture says is good or bad, I also don't care about those. Both of them sort of impose reasons for action that come from the outside. They are external reasons. They're reasons external to one's own motivational profile and goals and desires. So the kind of relativism he's describing, I would find it objectionable on normative moral grounds because it would require me to do things that are inconsistent with my goals and desires. And the realist would find it objectionable because it would require people to do things that are inconsistent with what the realist thinks the stance-independent moral facts are. So we end up in the same place, rejecting this type of agent cultural relativism, and we end up rejecting it for different reasons. Note, though, that where Shafer-Landau set out to object to views that lack normative authority, but the kind of view he describes appears like it does have a type of normative authority. It's just that the normative authority is grounded in stance-dependent facts about the standards of cultures rather than stance-independent facts. So I don't know exactly where he's going with this, but an anti-realist is well positioned to reject both moral realism and agent cultural relativism, precisely because I'm not interested in complying with these sort of stance-independent normative facts or stance-dependent normative facts that aren't reducible to my goals or desires. I don't believe in that type of normative authority. I'm not even sure it makes sense.
Leave that implication aside and focus on this authority point that I'm trying to highlight here. What I would say is that if I were that sort of iconoclast or you or anybody else, I'd scratch my head and say, why should I do what my culture says? And someone might say, well, because that's what morality is. And I'd say, you know what? It seems then that I don't have any reason to adhere to morality.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with him here. This is exactly how I would react. So if an agent culture relativist said, well, morality just is what your culture approves of and disapproves of, and you got to comply with it, I would be like, yeah, no thanks, I'm not interested. Now, I see where he's going with this. One might think that cultures just don't have the kind of normative authority to determine what we should or shouldn't do. I agree. Now, one could, by stipulation, just insist that these stance-independent moral facts just are those sorts of facts that have normative authority, whereas the cultural agent relativist is not able to yield some type of normative authority out of their account. On the other hand, cultural agent relativists could just insist normative authority stems from what cultures dictate or what cultures determine is right or wrong. I don't know that I don't know why we would think that that's like impossible. Is it really implausible? Sure, but I don't think realism is substantially more plausible, possibly less plausible. So, in other words, it's not clear that the agent cultural relativist couldn't lay claim to normative authority for cultures. It's just that, Russ Shafer-Landau and I might both agree that cultures are not a good foundation for having any sort of normative authority. We might both scratch our heads, perhaps for somewhat different reasons and from different perspectives, as to why we would care what our culture approves of or disapproves of. Who cares? And we might even agree on some for the same reason. So we might think, okay, well, it's contingent in a way that isn't interesting or motivating, or doesn't seem like it could or should have any kind of authority over us. So, in the realist's case, the stance-independent moral facts might be necessary. They're not contingent, and that might matter to somebody. Whereas in the culture relativist, you could think, well, counterfactually, you could just be subject to a different culture, and then you'd be subject to a different sort of normative moral standards. That'd be weird. And then in the case of individual relativism, you might think, well, if I had different preferences, then I would have different standards. And that's equally arbitrary. Well, maybe, but, I'm motivated to eat chocolate because I like it. If I get hit on the head and I stop liking chocolate and I start liking vanilla more or something, I actually do like vanilla, but suppose it's some flavor I currently don't like. Uh, it wouldn't be arbitrary because it's, my desires are closely connected to my motivations in a way where it would make sense if my preferences change for me to act accordingly. But if my culture changes, who cares? Why should I care about that? So yeah, I think we could look in puzzlement at any type of agent cultural relativism, which holds that what each agent ought to do is what their culture approves or disapproves of. Like they should do what their culture approves of, and they should abstain from what their culture disapproves of. Why would that have any authority over us? And I suppose by in contrast, Russ is going to argue, or Russ holds that stance independent moral facts can or do have the type of normative authority that cultural relativism would be unable to achieve. And I just don't think there's going to end up being a good case for that.
Because it's just, it's an expression, it's a normative system that results from an expression of uninformed prejudices. And so I don't have any reason to comply with it. I mean, I might have a practical reason. I'll get put in jail or otherwise condemned. But those sorts of reasons aside, what non-self-interested reason might I have to comply with it? And I think the answer in that case is none. The vision of morality that I am hoping is correct, is one according to which if something is morally required of you, then that carries with it a genuine, non-self-interested kind of practical authority, what I call normative authority.
Yeah, so genuine, non-self-interested practical authority. I don't think there is anything like genuine, non-self-interested practical authority. And, I'm even reluctant, I find the term objectionable, practical authority. I would have thought practical authority is the kind of authority that is enforceable, that there's consequences if you violate it. So, this is a distinction I might draw between the type of authority that Russ is talking about and the type of authority I would be responsive to. And we could call the type of authority I would be responsive to. And you could think about this yourself, what type of authority you would be responsive to. Let's call the type I'm responsive to enforceable authority. So enforceable authority is any authority according to which if one acts out of accord with the mandates of that authority, some sort of consequences follow that are relevant to you. They are relevant to your goals and interests. So, for instance, if there was a God and that God issued a set of decrees, and this isn't like the kind of hidden God that we deal with in this world. Like if there is one, it's not obvious. It could be closer to like gods in the Forgotten Realms, like in Dungeons and Dragons, where the gods like show up and talk to people and stuff. And let's say there's just one God, and that God is like, hey, unlike in that other universe with the Christian God who's like hiding and stuff, here's my rules, and they're very obvious. Here's the list. Don't do these things, and do these, and you got to do these things, like be nice to others and give to charity or whatever, and don't steal from people unless you have a very good reason to do it, and here's all the reasons why it's okay to, like, they don't have to be stupid rules. They could be like very nuanced and maybe rules that we think are pretty nice. Okay. Now you might say, okay, well, what if I break the rules? And the God's like, all right, well, here's what I'm going to do. Whenever you follow the rules, you earn points. Whenever you break the rules, you lose points. And when you die, I'm going to add up that sum total. And if it's negative, you're going to get tortured. And if it's positive, I'm going to give you like a eternal paradise. Okay, well, now I want to know what the rules are, and I want to follow those rules because eternal paradise sounds good and eternal punishment sounds bad. That sounds real bad. So very, very much like the Christian God in that sense, or at least some conceptions of the Christian God. In that case, you're responding to incentives you care about. Or think about the enforceable authority in the real world. If you could speed and there's no police and you never get pulled over and there's no like cameras that take photos and bill you a ticket or something like that, there's no consequences to speeding, then there's no enforceable authority. The rules, if violating them, don't have any consequences. So I take enforceable authority to be authority that can actually manifest in consequences you care about. That's what it is. So that's the kind of authority I'm responsive to. And the kind of authority that I would be responsive to in the normative sense would be one that's either imposed on others and is therefore like externally enforceable, or it's internally enforceable in the sense that to violate the norm, I would feel guilt or shame, or if to act in a way that I think is good, I would feel some sense of accomplishment or pride. So I'm driven by my goals and desires. And so the only normative truths I'm going to care about are ones that are mediated through my own motivations, goals, and desires. And if I happen not to care about external reasons, then so much for the external reasons, unless there's enforceable authority, unless there's some consequence for breaking those rules. And in the case of the type of normative authority that moral realists, non-naturalist realists believe in, what is the enforceable authority of these moral facts? Absolutely none. There is no consequence to violating them. There is no benefit to complying with them relative to one's goals, unless and only unless one has the goal of complying with them and not violating them. And in that case, the the authority is what? Like internal? It could also be that if other people believe in them and are motivated to enforce those rules, then they could become practically enforceable. But note in that case that in either case, in the like whether you care about them or whether other people care about them and then impose them on you, the entire sense in which they have any sort of authority is mediated either through your own contingent psychological profile or through the contingent psychological motivation, like the motivations of other people. So there's going to be these like empirical facts about the enforceable authority of normative authority. Absent that, it doesn't have any independent authority that has any consequences. And so it's a little weird to call it practical authority because practically speaking, it doesn't have any authority. There's no consequences anyway. And so whatever type of authority this is, it's a very ghostly type of authority. It's no different than a ghost king that issues royal decrees, but has a ghost army that can't touch or interact with the world in any way. Imagine I told you right now there's the ethereal monarch, and the ethereal monarch has a whole list of rules, and the ethereal monarch lays claim to control the entire universe, rules over the entire universe, and has a whole list of laws that if you you're breaking the rules, and they send out their ethereal armies to ethereally execute you or whatever, ethereally throw you in the ethereal jail, and it never has any. There are no observable ways in principle to know whether any of this is going on. You can't interact with this monarch. You can't interact with these ghostly enforcers. They never actually restrict any of your actual. They never in any way that you could ever possibly detect thwart any of your goals or desires. You can't even perceive them. There's no way to interact with them. But for whatever reason, we just know that it's true, that this ethereal monarch exists and has ethereal forces enforcing his ethereal laws. That is what the practical authority of moral realism amounts to. There's no functional difference. It does not make any practical difference. It's very strange to call it practical authority. There's nothing practical about it. Let's have a look at comments. So Sneer, this is regarding a cat remark from earlier. Philosophunculus said something mean about cats in your stream. I was disappointed in you for not pushing back on it and starting plotting the bribe in the comments here. Sorry, I don't know why I read that so poorly. I got like lazy reading it. Okay. Sneer says, Philosophunculus said something mean about cats in your stream. I was disappointed in you for not pushing back on that and started plotting the bribe in the comments here. Or there. Ah, man, why am I mess that up twice? Okay. All right. So yeah, okay. Maybe I didn't want to digress to argue about cats. I don't know. Luis says, "How do you, Lance? Hope things are going well. Going pretty well. I got a long weekend, so I'm going to get a lot of grading and work done." Svez, how do I say that? Svezepiatki says, "It's just X as a rhetorical device never fails to irritate me." Maybe that was said a little while ago, like it's just this. So I call those misleading modifiers. Like if someone says this isn't really true or that's not actually the case, a lot of times people use language like that. And I'm not going to get into it now, but a lot of it is very misleading. Okay. Like Shivak says, thank you in for logging in to do some philosophy with us and Snowed In Sunday. She goes, yeah, I don't know where you're at, but I am pretty much snowed in. Is nonstop snow. Although today it went above freezing, and so then we got very cold rain, and then that turned everything into like slushy ice, and so there's like slushy, muddy ice everywhere. But it's going to drop, and that's what's going to make it real bad. So we get rain and melting, and then it's going back to like super sub-zero temperatures, and then it's going to freeze, and we're going to get like the ice that's going to make cars slip all over the place and everything. It's going to be rough. Yeah, and I don't know if everybody knows, but I broke my ankle. So I was doing this for a little while with a broken ankle. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that I was here with a broken ankle because you can't see it. So I'm not looking forward to the ice because I had slipped and fallen. It wasn't on ice, but I'd slipped and fallen, and now I'm a little like, I'm worried about slipping and falling. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Party there. There are genuine reasons to comply with that, even if you don't like it, even if it doesn't.
Let's take it back a bit because Russ used one of what I call misleading modifiers. So I might end up having a reason to talk about them a little bit here.
Is with the genuine non-self.
Oh my God. Okay.
Would I am hoping is correct, is one according to which if something is morally required of you, then that carries with it a genuine non-self-interested kind of practical authority, what I call normative authority there. There are genuine reasons to comply with that, even if you don't.
Yeah, so note, he does use what I call a misleading modifier here, genuine authority. So take it back and listen again.
Then that carries with it a genuine non-self-interested kind of practical authority, what I call normative authority there. There are genuine reasons to comply with that.
Genuine reasons to comply as opposed to non-genuine reasons. So genuine reasons to comply, if these are supposed to be the external or stance independent reasons, those are genuine reasons to comply. There's a pragmatic implication, whether it's intended or not. So I'm not saying that he thinks this way, but if the stance independent normative moral facts provide genuine reasons to act in certain ways, this implies that other types of reasons are in a certain sense not genuine, like stance dependent considerations. So, if I don't want to comply with a stance independent moral rule, you might think desires provide stance dependent reasons, but those aren't genuine reasons. The stance independent reasons are the genuine reasons, even if that's not what's intended. Like, I don't think that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's the intended implication here. It'd be a little weird because typically speaking, realists will acknowledge that there are stance dependent reasons. There's prudential reasons. There's aesthetic reasons. There's gastronomic reasons. So we have stance dependent reasons. It's just we also have stance independent reasons. So I don't know what Russ's take on that is. But genuine in what sense? What does genuine mean? So genuine can be used as a matter of emphasis. It can mean that they're in a certain sense real. But why use that language? There's something. It's implying something about the status or nature of stance independent reasons or stance independent moral facts that is precisely the matter of contention with an anti-realist. So if you're an anti-realist, and let's say you have some reductive view of reasons where you hold that all reasons are reducible to facts about your desires, then though like actual, or you could say genuine reasons are your desires. And so stance independent reasons wouldn't be genuine reasons. They might not be reasons at all. So there's something a little, it's almost like laying claim to or presupposing your conception of the topic is like legitimate, and that rival conceptions aren't legitimate in the very framing or description of the topic under discussion. That's a little strange. Imagine like two people of different religions are arguing, and one of them is saying, well, I believe in the genuine God, and you believe in the God that doesn't exist. There's nothing necessarily wrong with saying that, but there is a presumptuous element to it. It's like your way of framing things is treating the very description of the thing as though you're right about it, when whether you're right about it is precisely the matter of contention. I don't think external reasons are genuine reasons. So I wouldn't, if that's what's to be argued for, that's fine. But I don't like that framing so much. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point on that. You could check out my blog where I talk about what I call the fake cheese fallacy. And it's closely related to this idea of what I call misleading modifiers. The way he's using it here, it's not so bad. I think Jason Brennan does this in a way that I find really, really objectionable, and I talk about that on my blog. In fact, let me post that because it's a recent one, and I was very happy with it. Yeah, just a few weeks ago. I'll post that in the chat. And Svez I don't know if I could shorten it to that. Yeah, so you said, wish you a quick recovery. Thank you. This was over 3 months ago when I broke the ankle, so I've already recovered. My foot's fine. All right, back to the video. But I do want to say, Russ is very, very careful here. And, there's caveats and qualifiers. And a lot of times we don't see that in these videos. And so credit to him for being, so careful in this discussion.
That even if you don't like it, even if it doesn't meet up with your expectations or hopes or your interests or needs, if something is morally required of you, then there's reason to do that. Naturalist realists, in fact, naturalists of all stripes, have had great difficulty making sense of that thought. That's I should say accounting for that thought within their theories. And some of them have tried gallantly to accommodate that thought, but most have been led to say, you know what? Morality doesn't have any special authority over us after all.
Let me just interject a little bit, because I want to get two things on the table very, very quickly before we pass on to other more interesting things. But number one, I should have said from the start that I entirely appreciate the attraction of moral realism, in the sense that there are objective rules, and that would be great if there were objective rules. So, I feel sad.
This is so strange. He sees the appeal. He's sad. Let's see what.
That I'm not a moral realist, even though
He's sad. He's not a moral realist. I find this so strange. I'd absolutely love to talk to Sean about this, because although I'm glad he is an anti-realist, or at least was at the time this video was produced. He said earlier that he would bite a bullet on the implications of constructivism. I don't think it has those implications. And here he's saying he's sad. He's not a moral realist. Why? What difference would it make? Why would it be appealing or good if moral realism are true? It's not just that I don't think moral realism is true. I also don't think it would matter if it was true. It wouldn't matter to me. And for those that it would matter to, I wonder why it would matter to them.
though I think that's the right thing to do. But the other is that I do like, and I'm not sure if this is respectable or not, but I do hold this view that there is a distinction between the kind of relativism that says, well, that culture over there has its own rules, they're not mine, but there's nothing I can say about them because they're theirs. And the kind of constructivism that says, each individual society or culture, whatever, is constructing its own rules, but I have every right to judge the other ones by my standards.
This is phenomenal. So I don't know if Sean Carroll is aware of this distinction, but he's drawing, perhaps intuitively, a distinction between agent relativism and appraiser relativism. And I've talked about these many times in the channel, so let's try to do a quick overview. Agent relativism holds that actions are morally right or wrong according to the standards of the agent performing the action or the culture of the agent performing the action. As such, each agent or each culture legislates or establishes what's morally right or wrong for that individual or culture in a way that all other individuals and cultures are thereby obligated to respect. So if a person believes it's morally okay for them to torture people, on this view, it is in fact morally permissible for them to torture people in a way that is normatively relevant to everyone else. Everyone else is thereby, on philosophical grounds, obligated to regard their acts of torture as morally good or morally permissible. That, if you're balking at that, good. I balk at that. I'm not going to buy into that. I don't think that's a very appealing type of moral relativism. But that's agent relativism. And agent cultural relativism would then say that the agent's actions are right or wrong according to whether their culture regards the action as right or wrong in a way everyone else has to respect. So if there is some culture that practices genocide or slavery or whatever, every other culture would be obligated to honor and acknowledge and respect and not interfere. Again, really, really pretty repugnant view, because this is the one that's frequently leveraged for people to say, well, if you're a relativist, then you would have to be okay with the Nazis, in carrying out the Holocaust. On a agent cultural relativism, that might very well be true, and that'd be a reason to throw that version of relativism in the garbage bin, because hopefully we're going to be against that, and we're not going to accept a meta-ethical theory that would tell us that we have to be in favor of it. But appraiser relativism says that you judge others and act accordingly based on your own moral standards. And so if you're against baby torture and someone's torturing babies, what's right or wrong for you to do is is to act on your standards. And for appraiser, culture relativist, what's right or wrong for you to do would be what's right or wrong according to your culture standards. And so if your culture is anti-slavery and there's some culture practicing slavery, there wouldn't be anything wrong with going in and imposing a slavery ban on them and stopping them from doing it. So that's appraiser relativism. And it's a lot less vulnerable to the types of objections that are frequently leveled against quote unquote relativism, when in fact they're typically just objections to agent relativism. Matt says, already gotten misleading modifiers on agent versus appraiser, just need normative entanglement for the trifecta. Yeah, you get a lot of these. Even when people are being careful, I think a lot of these problems pop up again. Again and again, all over the place. Andrew Moyes says, I think it might be something you mentioned early. This is in reference to why Carroll, I think, is making these sorts of concessions, like biting bullets and saying he wants realism to be true. Carroll might have purely psychological urge to say something like, my moral standards are special from a neutral standpoint. Right, but again, do you care if something is special from a neutral standpoint? I don't, and I don't know why anyone else would. And so if you don't care, that strips them of any sort of authority. The moment you don't care, the fact that something is held from a neutral standpoint is irrelevant. And you might say, so what if you don't care about gravity? Then it doesn't. Nope, because gravity will impose itself on you whether you want to or not. It has what you could call enforceable authority. But if you ignore stance independent moral facts, what are the consequences? Absolutely nothing. There's no consequences. So you see, to the extent that there is a quote unquote objective reality when it comes to like scientific facts, ignoring those facts carries consequences whether you like it or not. Whereas in the case of moral facts, ignoring them carries no consequences at all. So which one of these actually has authority? I would say gravity has far more authority than moral realist facts. The non-naturalist realist facts have zero enforceable authority. And the empirical world has all sorts of enforceable authority. That's why it matters to get the answers right, and why I don't think that it's simply a matter of what I prefer to be the case. So you see, there actually is an asymmetry there, and people frequently make comparisons. Oh, if you're going to reject moral realism, then you should reject that there's an external world. Nope. Mm-mm. Andrew Moy says, I do agree with you. I just think it's like how some people really like cheesy potatoes. I just really don't get it, but those people are out there. I love cheesy potatoes. Why don't you like cheesy potatoes? I don't know, what kind of cheesy potatoes do you have in mind? Do you have like the little potatoes that you roast them and you put some cheese on top? Or do you mean like cheese fries? What kind of cheesy potatoes are we talking about here? I love potatoes. You could cook them in so many ways. It's very versatile.
So I can say that your set of moral rules that you've constructed are not objectively wrong, but I still feel sincerely and honestly that they're not the ones you should have. And I'm not going to abandon my right or ability to either judge you badly or try to talk you out of them.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I take it.
Yeah, this is appraiser relativism that he's describing. Good job, Sean. And so if he has read stuff like that, then he is commendably well read on metaethics. If he hasn't read stuff, then he has managed to stumble across a very important distinction that even professional philosophers frequently downplay, ignore, or don't seem to be aware of. The latter is probably a little more impressive, but either of those is commendable. So, double thumbs up to Sean Carroll. That is a great distinction to draw.
That the latter view is the one that you'd endorse.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and good, because it's better than the first view, but still I'd say problematic.
Yeah, it's so better than the first view. Russ, Shafer-Landau and I completely agree about that. And in the blog post that's coming out, I talk about this. So agent relativism, I'm not a fan. I say something like, us anti-realists and realists should lock arms in rejecting the first one of those, because yeah, I mean, when realists call stuff repugnant, that is, I agree, that's repugnant. Agent relativism, but appraiser relativism, he says it's still problematic. You heard that. So what I talk about in the blog post is why I don't think appraiser relativism is problematic. And I say that I'm not even an appraiser relativist. I just don't think it's problematic. Oh, right. Koopa says, how do people even begin understanding philosophy well? Need some background reading for the background reading for this discussion. Yeah, if you're not up and up on meta ethics, I don't know how digestible this content is. if you're down for YouTube videos, I would strongly recommend Kane B's channel. I think it's the best channel on philosophy. It's one of the best channels on it in all of YouTube, in my opinion. It's fantastic. So go check out Kane B. As far as readings, I don't even know what I would recommend as far as a general like introduction to philosophy. I don't know. Uh, I had my intro books, but I don't even know if I'd recommend them. So I don't know how to get started on the topic. You could check out History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. It's a podcast that covers the history of philosophy without any gaps. It's very thorough. I don't know if it's still going, but I listened to that back in the day. I thought it was very good at an introductory level. Everything's bite-sized. You could also do, if you want bite-sized stuff, Philosophy Bites. That's usually it's current professional philosophers usually giving some insight into their areas of specialization. That could be a little hard to follow, but you are going to get a very wide range of very digestible, because these are short. They're often 10 or 15 minutes or so. Where else you could go? Okay, so that's like media content. As far as readings, I don't know. You could try an online course in philosophy, like Coursera or something. Might have free courses. I'm not sure. And it also depends on the area of philosophy that you're interested in. Some grounding in logic would be helpful. A general intro to philosophy would be good. If you're into ethics, a general intro to ethics. But I don't know books to recommend. All right. So this is probably a reference to History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. Dropped another episode recently. It's still going. Wow. So I probably was listening to that. I could it have been 10 years ago? If it's still going after 10 years, that's wild. Yeah, my favorites were History of Rome and then Revolutions, like history podcasts that got me into history. Revolutions is phenomenal. But I think he ended Revolutions some time ago, and I haven't seen anything new since then. Oh, Koopa says, "Hey, appreciate you answering that. Maybe I'll look into Majesty of Reason's." Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. I will. So, Majesty of Reason. That's the. Oh no, Joe! I just said Kane B's channel is the best, which implies your channel's not the best. I'm very sorry, Majesty of Reason. Well, Majesty of Reason is the best for what it is. So, Joe does a lot of stuff in philosophy of religion, and it's certainly the best channel for philosophy of religion. Joe brings people together that, atheists, agnostics, theists, people from all different perspectives on religion, and it produces some of the best content there. But the other thing about Majesty of Reason, the channel, is that he often provides very thorough notes for people. Like he'll provide a link, and you can check out like a Google Doc, and it's got notes to follow along. He makes a lot of general recommendations. So if you're looking for a place to start philosophy, that probably is one of the best places, if not the best place to start as far as YouTube. And then follow up with Kane B, because Kane B's stuff is often like fairly academic. It's still, I find, quite digestible, but Majesty of Reason might be the best place to start. That's a great recommendation. You recommended a better recommendation than I recommended to you. So you didn't need me. I'm useless. But at least I'll confirm or strongly encourage you to pursue whatever Majesty of Reason recommends. And he's really great. So I know him. We've spoken before, and it's not just that his channel is good. I've had a chance to talk to him. He is intimidatingly brilliant in a way that is almost scary. Especially because he's fairly early in his career. He's like just started his PhD. I wasn't at that level when I started grad school. Nowhere near it. So I don't know what's going to happen when he finishes. Like, is he just gonna? He might end up having arguments that are so compelling, so mind blowing that it melts other philosophers' brains, and like it'll be like X-Men or something, and he'll have to have like a metal thing over his mouth, like it's like Cyclops has to stop his eye beams, and Joe will have to be prevented from spouting philosophy because people will hear it and they'll go, "I can't be, it's true." Just ineffable truths that will just literally blow people's minds and people's heads, like The Boys or something. Okay, that's a weird tangent. Let's keep going. All right, great. And now he's going to see that. And sometimes he pops into the chat and he's going to be like, "What the hell was going on in the stream?" Oh boy. Okay. Hey, at least it's good stuff I'm saying. So that's a survivable, ridiculous rant. Yeah, other people talking about intro stuff. You could all talk to each other. Let's keep going with the video. In fact, I'm going to take a little break while you listen. So hopefully there's nothing I have to wind back to too much. So I'll be right back.
Problematic.
No,
In
sure, of
the,
course. I just want to let it know that that is a
surprise.
view. You don't have to just be a screaming relativist and say, well, whatever different societies want to say, that's fine. I can't judge them. I want to keep my ability to be judgy. That's all I want.
You got it. But then the question, of course, is that when you make a judgment, you do it by reference to some standard, and then if someone says, yeah, they could put it this way, who are you to judge?
Sure.
To which you have a great answer. I'm a person of, with a critical faculty and critical intelligence who, who's become acquainted with your culture and your ways. And on that basis, I'm judging you. But then,
Right.
but then there's a next step, and that is to say, are the standards by reference to which you're rendering your judgments, are those standards in any way morally superior to the standards of my own society?
Sure.
And that's something that's, I think, going to be very hard for you to answer. I mean, you can say, yeah, they are superior, but you're saying that by reference to your society's own standards. And so that looks pretty question begging, which, to the extent that things are claims are question begging, that's a problem. The realist, of course, doesn't face that, but the realist does, of course, face lots of other objections. Like, where's
exactly.
this
So I'm
yeah.
not even going to try to defend myself. I still want to get to the your positive
Yeah,
realist.
Okay,
point of
good.
view.
So there are lots of different ways of trying to defend realism. The way that I've come to do it is informed, I should say, by a years-long project that I'm still involved in with two other philosophers, my colleague at UW-Madison, John Bankson, and a colleague at the University of Vermont, Terence Cuneo. We're writing 3 books. It started out as one big book, and it's now three books.
All right. So if we go back to what he said earlier, imagine you're an appraiser relativist and you tell someone, and we'll get to the stuff that he's mentioning about this book. You're an appraiser relativist and you tell someone, well, I think what you're doing is wrong. And someone says, well, is your standards superior to my own? And you say, yes. Russ said that would be question begging. And I don't think that's the right criticism. The right criticism would be that it's vacuous and motivationally and practically irrelevant to the other person. So what does that look like? Well, on the appraiser relativist analysis of moral claims, they are indexed to the standards of the person making the claim or the person evaluating the claim. Typically or frequently, if someone's saying like stealing is wrong, they're saying that because they're expressing their own evaluation of the act of stealing. These can come apart. Like we could evaluate things from a third person perspective. So someone else can say stealing is wrong. And I could go, well, I disagree. I don't think stealing is wrong. And then it wouldn't be wrong relative to my standards. So you can do this in a third personal sense. But let's just say we're dealing with me making a claim and the claim is being indexed to my standards. In that case, if I say something like torturing babies for fun is wrong, I'm saying something like I disapprove of torturing babies for fun. And then that statement is going to be true, right? So when I say torturing babies for fun is wrong, I'm implicitly indexing my own standards. According to my standards, it is wrong. And so I'm making a factual claim about my standards. And that can amount to, if you de-implicify it, I'm not sure that's a word, but we made it a word. Then I'm saying something like, I disapprove of torturing babies for fun. Well, that statement's true. Now, imagine someone says, hey, why should I care about your moral values? And you say stuff like, well, I disapprove of what you're doing, and I don't agree with what you're doing, and I consider what you're doing wrong. You're not question begging if you say, if they say, well, are your standards better than mine? And you say, yes. What you're doing is, well, in what sense are they better? Well, they're better relative to your own standards. So my standards, I like my standards more than your standards. And so my standards are better than your standards according to my standards. So one of my standards is my standards are better than your standards. Of course, my standards are better than your standards. That's not question begging, but it is. I mean, maybe by question begging, there's something circular about that. I'm not sure exactly what he was getting at, but it certainly is the sort of thing where, like, a realist, I think, would be right to say that a natural reaction for people would be, okay, I don't care. It might also be a problem if someone said to the appraiser relativist, are your standards stance independently better? Like, what do they mean? Are your standards non-relatively better than mine? The answer to that should be no, they're not non-relatively better than yours. So they would have to clarify what they mean by better or superior or whatever. Okay, so now Russ Shafer-Landau is talking about a project. I think the book has come out since then. I think they actually have multiple projects. let me get the name for it. It's Bingson, Cuneo, and Shafer-Landau. What is that book? Oh, I have it saved. Access to it saved. Not that one. Should be this one. The Moral Universe. That's the book. Oh, let me see if I could give everybody a link to it. So, yeah, throw a link to it in here. It's on my list of stuff I got to read. Okay, I don't know. You probably won't be able to access it. I have some sort of like library access to it, so I don't know if you can access it. But yeah, he's got the book has since come out. When did that come out? 2024, about halfway through. So when was this discussion from? 4 years ago. Oh wow, quite a long time ago. So, and yeah, the book came out a little less than a year ago. So it's about 3 years later that this came out. Cool. All right, let's keep going. And I skipped a few words. I don't want to miss anything. So
and a colleague at the University of Vermont, Terence Cuneo, we were writing 3 books. It started out as one big book, and it's now three books. And one of the books, a short one, is on methodology in philosophy. And I'm one of the folks who's responsible for developing this methodology. And so in a nutshell, what the methodology tells us is that the way to make progress in gaining understanding of a given area in philosophy is by first trying to identify the data within that domain, and then constructing theories that have to meet various criteria of adequacy that attempt to account for that data. In ethics, there are a lot of data that we either have to account for or have to explain away. And of course, it's going to be a philosophically controversial matter which of these data stand the test and which of these data ought to be tossed aside.
It's also frequently going to be a controversial matter whether or not they are the data, so, if I showed up and I said, hey, some of my data on aliens abducting people are that these people have been abducted by aliens, that would be a bit question beggy as far as my framing of the data. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that Russ and his colleagues do this when it comes to the quote unquote data, but I do worry that they help themselves to assumptions about the content of the data that I wouldn't endorse, and that would be a matter of contention. I do believe I've heard Russ be open to people challenging what the data itself is. And so there would be this like more fundamental matter to litigate, which isn't simply how do we weigh all the, like, what do we have? Okay, what's all the stuff we got on the table? Now, how do we weigh all that? By analogy, it could be that the prosecution and the defense can agree on what the evidence is for and against the guilt of the defendant. And then the question is, how do we weigh all that? How do we weigh witness testimony against like an alibi? How do we weigh forensic evidence against circumstantial evidence? That sort of thing. They might agree on what the evidence is and then weigh it differently. That is what he's getting at. Like, let's establish the data. Then now, once we've done that, let's evaluate it. But someone might say, I don't think that's data. I don't think that's a data point. So we or they might disagree on what the data points are. And I think that's very likely how I would approach this. Maybe a lot of anti-realists would actually agree on data, like people commonsensically are moral realists or something. And I wouldn't agree with that. So there are potentially going to be some fairly stark disagreements that I would have about the content of what it is we're supposed to be evaluating.
But one of the big benefits of moral realism, which has been recognized for a while, but it's never been, I don't think, been put quite this way, is that when it comes to the data of ethics, moral realism does a fantastic job of accounting for them. So the data have to do with things like our possibility that some moral views are true and some are false, the possibility that some people are morally wiser than the actuality that some people.
Yeah, so it's a little weird to call possibilities data. What I don't know what that means. So, assuming the view is assuming a view is intelligible and isn't riddled with logical contradictions or something. Sure, it's possible. I don't know exactly what sense of possibility means. If he's talking about logical possibility, I might even question that because, again, I don't think non-naturalist realist accounts are typically intelligible. So I don't even think they're possible a lot of the times. Again, you have to be very specific about what the view is, but generally speaking, I don't think non-naturalist views are possible. But supposing that they are possible, that doesn't strike me as a very interesting type of data. So I don't know what it is we're supposed to be explaining. What is the data exactly? The data is that they're possible. That can't be the data.
Things like our the possibility that some moral views are true and some are false.
Okay, the possibility that some views are true and some are false. I don't know why he's not being clearer here, like that the possibility that some are true or false in a stance independent way. So is the data that it's possible that things are stance independently right or wrong? I mean, that I don't know how that can constitute data.
The possibility that some people are morally wiser than the
Again, like you'd have to unpack what that means. So I certainly think some moral statements are true or false. I certainly think some people are morally wiser than other people. But my views of these would all be consistent with anti-realism. So if he means wiser with respect to the stance independent moral facts, then again, it just sounds like saying something that's like derivative or downstream of saying it's possible realism is true. And like it's possible realism is true, I don't think is going to be particularly good data. But even if moral realism is presented as an explanation for something, would the idea be that it's possible moral realism is true, and then moral realism is a good explanation for why it's possible that realism is true? I mean, like this could be easily, that by itself could be easily parodied. So we'd have to see the book and see the details. But like just for comparison, is it possible Bigfoot exists? Okay, well, one good explanation for the possibility that Bigfoot exists is that Bigfoot exists. And you could just repeat this ad infinitum for any claim you want. Is it possible ghosts exist? If you say yes, okay, well, one explanation for why it's possible they exist is that they do exist. So you could do something like that. It wouldn't be very philosophically interesting.
The actuality that some people are morally wiser than others, that our moral judgments are given by beliefs that can be correct or incorrect.
Is this supposed to be data that our moral judgments are?
Then the actuality that some people are morally wiser than others.
Is he
possibility that some moral views are true and some are false. The possibility that some people are morally wiser than the actuality that some people are more.
If he's saying the actuality that some people are wiser, again, unpack wiser. If he means the actuality that people are wiser in a way consistent with anti-realism, that's not going to be better explained by realism. If he means the actuality that people are wiser in a way, like wiser with respect to stance independent facts, that could only be explained by realism. But the question, the matter of contention would be whether or not people are in fact wiser in that respect. So again, I'm not seeing how we've got data here that's better explained by realism.
Morally wiser than others, that our moral judgments are given by beliefs.
Our moral judgments are given by beliefs. So when you make a moral judgment, it's given by, or it's a product of a belief. Okay, again, without further specification, that's consistent with anti-realism, or at least many forms of anti-realism. And if that's the case, is he making an empirical claim? And if so, what's the data that supports the empirical claim? And like, which moral judgments is he talking about? What beliefs is he talking about? There's going to be a lot of details to unpack here. I'm not saying he can't answer these questions. I'm just saying and he is just listing off stuff. And keep in mind, this was a few years before the book came out. So this is a work in progress. So I don't want to go too hard on him here, but there's a lot of, this is prompting more questions in me than it is answering. Maybe that's the point. Like maybe he's, hey, I got a book. I'm working on this stuff. Here's what I'm working on. It doesn't have to address all what he's saying here doesn't have to address all these questions in a satisfactory way to merely list off some of the things he does talk about. You know what I mean? So I don't want to be too critical here.
That can be correct or incorrect, that there are reasons to do what's morally required of us and reasons against doing what's morally prohibited of us.
Yeah, so that I do find genuinely puzzling. If that's supposed to be data, well, I don't think that is data. I mean, that's the thing you're supposed to establish, not the thing that's established and then we need to explain. I don't think we have reasons of the kind he's talking about, or it's ambiguous or unclear what he means by that. And we'd have to disambiguate. And either on disambiguation, it's going to end up being consistent with anti-realism in a way where I don't think realism provides a better explanation, or it's going to be inconsistent with anti-realism in a way where I don't think it's the data. It's the thing to be explained. You see what I'm saying? So, if someone says, hey, it's true that we have reasons to do things. And then I say, okay, well, what do you mean by reasons? And they say, well, by reasons, it could be desires, it could be stance independent or external reasons. Okay, well, if it could be desires, then how does realism better explain the fact that we have these reasons? Well, the answer is it doesn't, if they're just desires. And if you say, no, they can't be desires, they've got to be reasons that are true, independent of your goal standards or desires. Okay, so we have reasons, and they're the only kinds of reasons these are reasons that would be true if realism was true. Well, of course, that's best explained by realism. But then I'm just going to say, well, I don't think we have reasons of that kind. So I don't know what's going on here. This sounds quite strange to me.
That in some way, morality's demands are inescapable. And
Yeah. So again, how is that supposed to be data? So if inescapable moral facts or inescapable moral truths are what realist moral truths are, and I don't think there's moral realist truths, why would I think that part of the data is that there are inescapable moral truths? Why would I think that? That's like in the list of things that I'm denying. For example, suppose the matter of contention is whether God exists or not, and you say that one of the pieces of data that theism and atheism are in contention to explain is the fact that God has issued us commands, or the fact that there are commands that could have only been issued by a deity. Why would an atheist agree that there's data of that kind? Or you might say that the Ten Commandments were not produced by any non-supernatural beings. That's the data. Well, why are they going to agree that there's data of that kind? They're probably not. And so one thing that the anti-realist could very well do in all these cases is, if this is supposed to be data to be explained, is they could just say, I don't think that's data. I don't think that is the thing to do the explaining, not the thing to be explained. Uh, so, if you think the existence of inescapable moral facts explains some intuition, sentiments, phenomenology, feelings, attitudes, or judgments that I have, sure, tell me why it's a better explanation than my anti-realist view. But what I'm certainly not going to grant is that it's the case that I have reasons or whatever, inescapable normative moral demands. I don't think there's anything like that. And I don't think it seems like there's anything like that. And I don't agree that that's data.
And yet not yet, but and in other ways, they enjoy a kind of priority over some considerations, like those of self-interest, at least in a wide range of cases.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's anything like that either. And I certainly don't think that's part of the data. So also self-interest. So we have to be careful about self-interest. So there's acting with respect to your goals and desires, but there's a sense of self-interest could be just acting with respect to whatever your goals and desires are. And then there's self-interest where your goals and desires are self-regarding and not other regarding. So, I wouldn't say that I act only in self-interest, because that makes it seem like I don't care about other people. But I'm only motivated to act with respect to my goals and values. I don't give a damn about stance independent moral facts or reasons. I don't care at all. I wouldn't comply with them if I knew what they were. I only act on my goals and desires, but I care about other people, care about my family, and I will act according to my value of them. So, there is that room in the middle where people act on their goals and desires, but it's not purely a matter of self-interest.
Um, these and other data are what I regard as quite plausible starting points for theorizing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, see, he describes those as data, as starting points for. So I don't consider almost anything he mentioned there at all plausible. In fact, most of what he said there strikes me as profoundly implausible, and so they would not strike me as decent starting points for an inquiry. And if those were the starting points, I would consider realism more or less established already. I mean, that just sounds like stuff that would only be true if realism is true, or at least it's ambiguous. And if you disambiguate it, it would either be irrelevant to the truth of realism or would virtually entail realism. Again, for comparison, imagine if I said that we're arguing about whether Bigfoot exists, and I say that some of the data we have is that we have Bigfoot's DNA. Sorry, it shouldn't be that straightforward. It has to be a little more indirect. We have DNA from a large terrestrial primate that appears genetically unrelated to like what, platyrines and catarines or something like that. Like it's something that would be like hard to explain unless you say, yeah, it's Bigfoot. You know what I mean? Or we accept data that the footprints that we observed in some national park or something that's supposed to be Bigfoot. Did I get that right? 1 second. Yeah. So some footprints that we found in some park, they are the footprints of a real terrestrial organism that was observed recently, or that famous video that's supposed to be Bigfoot, that's not a person in a suit or something like that. If that's supposed to be the starting point of the data, okay, if that's not a person in a suit, then I would be pretty confident in saying, okay, Bigfoot's real. But of course, I don't think that's a Bigfoot in a suit. I think I don't think Bigfoot in a suit. Oh my God. That would be funny if Bigfoot's running around in a human suit and everyone's like, oh, it's just a big human. And actually it's Bigfoot. But that whether or not those things fit those descriptions, I don't think that the footprints we found are actually footprints of Bigfoot. I don't think that video actually features something that's not a person in a suit. I don't think that we have DNA from Bigfoot. or from a large primate that's native to North America or something like that. That's precisely what I don't think we have data of. We have data, whether or not it's best explained in those terms. Those are the posits that would be used to argue that Bigfoot exists. That isn't the data. That is the explanation of the data. So a lot of the things he's claiming here are starting points. I don't find these remotely plausible. And how was it established that these are plausible? Is there an argument for that? Is there evidence for that? How are we establishing this? So Andrew Moy says, Shafer-Landau has a very weird conception of data. If I remember correctly, he explicitly rejects the idea that data needs to be facts that both parties take to be true prior to the debate. Yeah, I think I've heard. I don't know what to do at that point, because like if he's saying I don't have to take the data to be true, can I just say, well, then I don't think you have data. So it's not that it's data, but I'm denying it's true. I'm denying you have data. Like, can I do that? Like what moves are available to me if I don't agree with the things that he considers data? So Andrew continues, he thinks something like data could be neutral while still favoring one theory over others. Personally, I think I have no clue how to even begin parsing that view. Yeah. Again, am I allowed to disagree on this view? Because if I'm not, then I just don't accept the view. And I'm going to say, well, whatever method you're using, I reject the method. I don't accept that this stuff is data. I don't accept that it doesn't, what he's describing doesn't sound neutral to me. It sounds like it's highly favorable towards realism. He thinks something like that. Yeah. All right. I already read that. Oh, I guess you just said the same thing twice. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this is just something I'd have to dig into in detail to really engage with it more fully. But the initial encounters I've had with it, it does not sound very promising to me as an approach or a method. But I am curious to hear more. And I am going to have to wrap things up pretty soon. So let's do another 10 or 15 minutes.
And I'm not going to try to enumerate all the data in metaethics, but I think it's fairly uncontroversial that if you were to come to try to identify a long list of those claims that inquirers consider collect.
Okay. Sorry, we got some good stuff here, so I really want to digest
range
it.
Of cases. These and other data are what priority over.
Hold on, let's take it all the way
that
back.
In some way, morality's demands are inescapable, and yet in other ways, they enjoy a kind of priority over some considerations, like those of self-interest, at least in a wide range of cases. These and other data are what I regard.
Yeah, he does. He is describing that stuff as data. That doesn't sound like data to me. He might be. I'm guessing he has some sort of proprietary technical conception of data. So I'd have to know what that is, and he hasn't explained it here. So I don't know. Like, I don't think any of that stuff is true. I don't think any of that stuff is plausible. But I think he's about to articulate some standards for why he considers this data, which has something to do with like the collective judgments of people.
Regard as quite plausible starting points for theorizing.
Mm-hmm. So again, I don't think any of that is plausible. It's not even that I think it's like a contender for being plausible. I actively think it's implausible, just to be clear. Like pretty much everything he said there. I think all of that is very implausible.
And I'm not going to try to enumerate all the data in metaethics, but I think it's fairly uncontroversial that
so that's unclear. Fairly uncontroversial according to who? And if this is according to meta-ethicists, then I would just reject meta-ethicists. And if they insisted it's uncontroversial to them, then I dismiss them. And I don't feel obligated to consider people experts if they just accept things based on mysterious or inscrutable criteria that I don't agree with. Okay, so if it's not controversial among them, so much for them. I don't care, because I don't accept this. This is certainly controversial relative to my evaluative standards.
That if you were to come to try to identify a long list of those claims that.
Okay, so we're going to get a big list of the alleged data, right? And then we're going to do something with that data. We're going to show it to people.
That inquirers consider collectively have good reason to believe.
Okay, so inquirers consider collectively. If you gathered all the data, inquirers consider collectively
at the outset of inquiry. Okay. A long list of those claims that inquirers consider collectively have good reason to believe at the outset of inquiry.
So this strikes me as very strange. So there's all this data that, if it were true, I think would be best or only explained by realism being true. Okay. Uh, and he's saying if you enumerated all this, inquirers would have good reason to accept this from the outset of inquiry. Why? And how do we know that? How was that established? So, if I said, hey, my approach to establishing that anti-realism is true is to point out that there's all this data that needs to be explained, and the data is all the stuff that would basically only be true if anti-realism is true. And then I said, at the outset of inquiry, there's all these plausible facts like there are no reasons that are true independent of our goal standards or desires or something like that. And then I say, like, people considered collectively on reflection or on considering the matter would agree with this and have reason to believe this. Um, like the realists would just not agree that that's true. They would just say, yeah, but I don't think that they have reasons to think that. And I think very much the same way here. Why would I grant that we have reason at the outset of inquiry to accept any of the stuff that he listed? None of that seemed plausible to me. So, if the claim then is like is this like a hypothetical? Like hypothetically, were people to consider this in the right way, or almost like a Rawlsian like veil of ignorance or something? If people were to consider this, then that's what they would consider the data. How has that been established? Is that like an a priori claim? Because then I, I, I don't grant that. Is it an empirical claim? Okay, well, has it been tested empirically? I very much doubt it. So, like, what kind of claim is this, and how are we establishing that this is true? Again, a priori claim, I don't agree. Empirical claim, where's the data that this is what people would agree to is the data, like data in the empirical data sense. We could say data like empirical data. Where is the empirical data that this is what, in fact, people would agree to under the conditions he's outlined here is the data of metaethics? How has that been established? So, I'm certainly not going to grant that it's been established because he thinks it's plausible, or because he says so, or because he stipulates that it's the case. I would want to know how we have in fact established that this is the data in metaethics for us to work with. Because I don't accept that this is the data, and I don't accept that people would have reason to believe this on considering these various claims or candidates for being data. I don't grant any of that. So I make zero concessions to any of this. And I would want to know what the arguments for this are and why I should agree with any of this. And I expect, if I'm being honest, to be totally dissatisfied with what I get out of whatever that account's going to be.
Those claims would be handled really well by moral realism and less well by other views. Now, again, that's just the start of the conversation. It's not necessarily the end.
Yeah. So I don't grant that that's the start of the conversation. So I don't grant that he or his colleagues are in a position to stipulate, dictate, or declare where the conversation starts. That's not where I'm willing to start the conversation. And I don't think that that's something that could be established by like fiat. I don't know how, like, why would I grant that? I'm very puzzled by this. I'd like to hear more.
The end of the conversation, because it's always open to people, other theorists, to say, you know what, some of these data are misleading. That moral realism can account for them doesn't make it a superior kind of view, because we should explain these data away. And that's, if you take a look at the nihilist, they're going to say most of these data are, maybe all of them, depending on what your list looks like. Most of these data, at least, are bunk. They ought to be tossed. They're
what
they're
are
vestiges of outdated thinking.
What are some examples of the data we have in mind here?
Oh, ones of the sort I was just mentioning, namely that it's possible that it's actual rather, that some moral claims are true, others are false.
But sorry,
That-
that
How is that data? This is so puzzling.
data?
Yeah.
That's ones of the
So
sort
Sean
I was
is
just
equally as
mentioning,
puzzled as me.
namely that it's possible that it's actual rather, that some moral claims are true, others are false.
But sorry, is that data? In what
That's
sense is that data? Is I guess is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's data in this sense. The conception of data I'm working with is that of a claim that inquirers considered collectively have good reason to believe at the outset of inquiry.
So how have we established that? What is the exact phrasing for that? Let's
Since
get that down.
the conception of data I'm working with is that of a claim that inquirers considered collectively have good reason to believe at the outset of inquiry.
Okay, there's the claim. So by data, he means that of the claim that inquirers considered collectively have good reason to believe at the outset of inquiry. So how do we determine what inquirers considered collectively have good reason to believe at the outset of inquiry? So the things he listed, I don't believe that I have good reason to consider I don't think I have good reason to consider those um, things to be the data. So he might say, okay, that's fine, but inquirers considered collectively do. How do we establish that? What do we do to establish that? Yeah, I'm not grokking this.
Okay.
That claim is as we put it, as philosophers put it, defeasible.
Right.
The
It might not be
claim
true.
might be
Yeah.
false. It might be defeated by, but you need some at least equally strong justification for thinking that datal claim, that piece of that datum, is mistaken.
Got
If
it.
you
Yeah, so he's setting up a presumption in favor of the data. So I don't know how this could possibly be neutral. So he's saying like it's defeasible. You would need equally good. So this is burden shifting in a way that I consider highly inappropriate. Like I have to present data against moral realism or like against this data in order to endorse moral realism. Sorry, I have to present data that serves as defeaters of this data. Or sorry, take it all the way back. Maybe he wouldn't consider my defeaters data. So I have to present defeaters of the data in order to have a justification for being an anti-realist. So there is this data. The data favors realism, and if I want to defend anti-realism, I have to defeat the data. But if I don't grant that it's the data, then I don't think I have that obligation or that burden to defeat the data. So this seems to be putting a bunch of considerations that strongly favor realism on a sort of epistemic pedestal and then saying we win unless you knock this down. And I don't think anti-realists should feel any inclination to grant that it's on that pedestal, that there's any presumption in favor of realism. There are philosophers that have argued against the presumption in favor of realism. I've discussed one recently on my blog. Neil Sinclair has a great paper arguing against the presumption in favor of realism. I think that the move anti-realists need to make at this point is to reject this as the starting point of the inquiry. They should just say, no, we don't grant that this is the point where we need to start, that you haven't convincingly established that this is a starting point. Now, if a lot of anti-realists get on board with realists and they all agree that this is a starting point, then I'm going to reject I'm going to reject that inquiry. And to me, it would be a lot like, theists and atheists agreeing that like intercessory prayer works and that the resurrection took place and various other sorts of things. And now the question is, does God exist? Is Christianity true? When I don't agree with any of those things, and I don't think we have good reason to believe those things considered collectively. So I would be out of that discussion because it's a discussion among a bunch of people that are granting as true things that I don't think are true, or granting a presumption in favor of things that I don't grant that there's a presumption in favor of. I am not personally obligated to grant that. And so if that's where anti-realists want to start the inquiry, I have a serious bone to pick with them. Yeah, Zictomorph says it sounds like he's saying people have good reasons to believe as the reason without actually saying the good reasons themselves. Yeah, he has not provided us with these good reasons to believe this stuff at the outset of inquiry. I don't know what those reasons would be. Like what are they?
if you can't provide that, then accounting for that datum is a constraint on the development of a theory that's going to yield illumination of the domain in question.
Okay, good. I guess what if I have a objection, maybe this is the right time to say it. I'll advertise your books. You have a big book on moral realism and then a little book on what happened to good and evil, which is sort of like the baby version for those of us who are not going to become professional moral philosophers. And it's a great read. It's very, very readable for people who are interested in these questions. And you go through a lot of the possible objections to this kind of moral realism. And I didn't find my objection in there in at least the words that I would use to put it in. So I guess my objection is you talk about the potential objection from disagreement, right? Just you might imagine the fact that just because people disagree about morality, somehow that undermines the claim that there are objectively real moral statements. And that seems pretty easy to refute. I mean, people disagree about all sorts of things. But my worry is not that there exist disagreements, but that I don't know how to adjudicate the disagreements. Like if someone says 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah, I don't consider these to be especially compelling objections to realism. What I would have done at this point is question his conception of what data is and whether or not these things we have good reason to believe these at the outset of inquiry. Like I would have a bunch of questions about what he just said there. Um, Now this is a little better than appeals to like, hey, people disagree, you know, something something therefore anti-realism is not a good argument. Hey, we don't have the epistemic tools or resources to resolve moral disagreements. That is closer to a decent argument for anti-realism, but I still don't think it's a very good objection.
And someone else says 1 + 1
Sorry,
=
I
3.
interrupted in mid-sentence, and I am going to wrap this up in about 5 minutes.
I know my worry is not that there exist disagreements, but that I don't know how to adjudicate the disagreements. Like if someone says 1 + 1 = 2 and someone else says 1 + 1 = 3, I know how to sit down and check which one is correct. And if someone says the universe is expanding and someone else says the universe is contracting, likewise, I know what experiments or observations to make. But if someone says, in the trolley problem, you should let the trolley hit the 5 people, and in another person says, no, you should take an action and just kill the 1 person. I don't know what experiments to do or what logical exercise to go through to figure out which one is correct. Is that a reasonable objection to realism?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, so he says absolutely. I don't think it's a reasonable objection to anti-realism. To realism. Very sorry, Sean. It sounds like a question. Like I don't know how to do. Like, so what is the objection? If like you could make this into an objection, if moral realism were true, I would be aware of the resources for resolving these disagreements. I'm not aware of them, so realism isn't true, or something like that. Maybe was that valid? I think that was a modus tollens. So it would be something like that. But you could just not be aware of the resources or tools, and like they could exist, and then they could allow you to resolve it. And this is exactly what a realist say. They say, yeah, you just use the standard tools of like intuitions and reflective equilibrium and conceptual analysis and whatever other stuff is in the analytic philosopher's toolkit. And they say you should be doing that. You're not doing that, so of course you're not going to resolve it. And we do have the means of resolving it. So the realist is a very straightforward response to this, and I don't think that response actually works. But it optically, this doesn't get you anywhere. It's just going to get you to an impasse, which is back to like the intuitions and the methods that the realists are using in the first place. So really, I think if you want to go after realism, you got to know the methods they're using to get at it, and then directly go after the methods. Just saying, I don't know what you could do, doesn't mean that there isn't something you could do. So instead, you need a stronger argument, which is there are not means of resolving these disputes. And then that would lead you to something like a moral skepticism. So it wouldn't directly show that there are no stance independent moral facts, but it would show if there are, we don't have any method of knowing about them. And so that at least could be a decent argument for moral skepticism. That's a step away from anti-realism. Good enough, maybe. But he doesn't quite push. I think Sean could have framed the argument a little more strongly, but then it's very difficult to actually show that. Like, how do you show we don't have any methods of resolving these disagreements?
It's absolutely a reasonable objection. And it's one of the hardest, I think, for realists to handle. Once more, I want to be clear that realists have available to them a variety of different epistemological strategies for handling this objection. I don't want to canvass them all because it would take too much time, be tedious, and I don't endorse them all.
Yeah, no, we don't need to get all of them. Let's get the good ones.
That's right. Yeah. But I want to back up actually and say something by way of a preliminary, and that is that as I understand your objection, it's basically an epistemological objection. It's that in circumstances of disagreement, let's call it fundamental disagreement, where the disagreement is not owing to a mistake in about some ancillary factual non-moral matter, which is such that if one of the parties to the disagreement were to come to realize their mistake about that, then they'd agree with you about the morality.
Yeah.
So let's not focus on that sort of disagreement. In that case, here's the worst case scenario, that there'd be no way of resolving that sort of disagreement. What I want to say is that even if there were no way to do that, it's not clear to me why that would impugn realism. Because realism is, in the first instance, a claim, a metaphysical claim. It's a claim about what there is, namely moral reality, not of our own creation. And I'd want to explore the possibility that, although, here's worst case scenario again, we can't resolve these fundamental disagreements. They're just intractable, even in principle. So suppose that's right. It's not clear to me what that would tell us about the existence or non-existence of a moral reality. You might think, well, if something is objectively real or objectively true, then in principle, there's got to be a way of convincing everybody of its truth.
Yeah, I don't think that that's true. Why would so if something is real, why would there be in principle a way of convincing everybody of that? Maybe there would just not be a method of it. Is that exactly what he said?
Objectively
I'm like really second guessing myself.
real or objectively true, then in principle, there's got to be a way of convincing everybody of its truth.
Yeah, I don't that doesn't seem true to me. There could be truths and then you can't convince people of them. Not even in principle.
But unfortunately for realists, we see no possibility of convincing everyone of the truth of any
Okay.
given
Yeah,
moral
cool.
claim, no matter how obvious.
Yeah, so
Sean and
we're on
Russ
the same
might
page then.
find it.
Great. Yeah. So the
Never
thing he's saying, someone could say this. Isn't that what he's doing here? I think I just agree with him. Then.
objectively true, then in principle, there's got to be a way of convincing everybody of its truth. But unfortunately for realists, we see no possibility of convincing everyone of the truth of any given moral claim, no
Yeah.
matter how obvious, Sean and Russ might find it.
Yeah. So the idea here would be, look, it could be that there's these 10 independent moral facts. Some of us know about them, and then just some people you can't convince them. And so moral disagreement may persist, and there may be no means of fully resolving all moral disagreements. But that's not really going to tell you that moral realism isn't true. I just agree with him about this. I think this is right, and this is why once you look at these types of objections, I don't think they're particularly good objections. So yeah, this is W for Russ Shafer-Landau on this for sure. I think this is a good response. There could be people that are just incorrigible, and a view isn't false because some people are incorrigible. Imagine God exists, but you just have these like really committed atheists that are just like, I refuse to believe God exists. And then someone says, look, there's all these atheists that keep arguing that God doesn't exist, and we have no method of convincing them. How would we resolve this disagreement? Okay, well, is that might be a reason maybe to be a agnostic. But if you think you've got good reasons to believe in God, and there's these people that just are like, no, there's no God, and like you do all the stuff you think is a good method, and they just are like for resolving these matters, and they're like, nope. I wouldn't at the end of that conclude, okay, well, I guess I got to be agnostic. I think I would just conclude those people are really stubborn and incorrigible. Like, too bad for them. I just agree with the realist perspective on the matter, if this is the kind of response they offer. Now, you do run into like the tier 3, right? So tier 1 is simply moral disagreement. Tier 2 is we lack the epistemic resources to convince everybody. Now, within that zone, there's a difference between we lack the resources or tools to convince everyone, but there's still a zone to press the argument further and say, no. I'm not saying everyone needs to be capable of being persuaded in principle or in practice. You could say, I don't know what tools we could use to resolve disagreements, like in a general sense. Like, what are those tools? We don't have them. So that maybe that's not specific enough, but you could move to this third tier. Maybe that is just in the third tier. And the third tier would be something like this. Assume that two people are, for instance, epistemic peers. They have equally good justifications for their views, and even then people don't agree, or they can't resolve their dispute. In that case, we've got a problem. And the problem in that case isn't that I think I've got good reasons to believe in God and you're just incorrigible. It's that I think you have equally good reasons to believe whatever you believe, and I don't think my reasons are better than your reasons. And so now at that point, it's hard to resist the pull of agnosticism on the matter. And in that case, that could lead you to a type of like, you don't positively affirm the truth of the claim in question. So you would have to like really step up the epistemic case to like higher and higher levels to really push towards this objection working as raising significant concerns for realists. Otherwise, like merely saying some people can't be persuaded, that's not gonna do the job.
Nevertheless, there can be some outliers who disagree, and even in principle, we can't get them over to our side. So
I think I'll stop there, and we'll continue with this next time. I got to go make dinner. All right, everybody. This wasn't a big interactive conversation this time, which is, sometimes I love having those. Sometimes I want to get through some video content. We got through a good chunk of it here. So this is part 4. We probably got 5. No, there's actually a section that's coming up soon, the cosmological multi. Okay, let's try to finish this section. Just give me, I'm going to finish it up, and then I'll go make dinner. So let's get through
Suppose maybe that's wrong. That's let's be really optimistic. That's wrong. We could get everybody over to our
this.
side.
So we'll finish.
But
in
I'm not
time.
optimistic like that.
Yeah.
Or sorry,
no.
without
I
any
think,
further videos.
So let's assume that there really is such a thing as what I called fundamental disagreement.
Sorry, I
Now the
was
question
interrupted.
is,
So I think I'm going to try to finish here, and then we won't need to review further in the video, because you can see the next section, cosmological multiverse. I don't really care about that very much. I mean, it's interesting, but I don't want to review it.
we could get
So let's take it
disagree,
back, and we will
even in
finish this video.
principle, we
Okay. Keep hitting play. Okay.
can't get them over to our side. So suppose maybe that's wrong. That's let's be really optimistic. That's wrong. We could get everybody over to our side. But I'm not optimistic like that.
Yeah, no.
I think, so let's assume that there really is such a thing as what I called fundamental disagreement. Then the question is, what's the theoretical fallout? Now, there are 2 possibilities here. One is to say, you know what? There's an objective reality out there, despite our inability to convince everyone of its nature or its content. And the other is to say, well, if we can't convince everyone in principle about this matter, then there can't be, or the best explanation of that is that there isn't an objective reality. Now, I want to hear more about why we should go that latter route rather than the former, because I think, if you look at other areas of philosophical disagreement, like whether there's a God or not, they're brilliant people on both sides. And I doubt, I'm pessimistic myself about whether we're ever going to get consensus on that matter, no matter how informed about the empirical elements of our universe we are. And yet, I think in that case, although I'm pessimistic about the possibility of resolving fundamental disagreement on this matter, I think to me, it's very clear that you should be a realist about this matter. Namely, whether God exists or not isn't up to us.
Right.
I know there's some people
Yeah,
who
actually use the
disagree, who
same
think that
example.
we create God in some way, or
Right.
or whether there is a God has in some way to answer to our own beliefs about it. But I think that's really an implausible view. I think either there is, let's fix our target here, an omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent creator of the universe, or there isn't. And it doesn't, our say-so doesn't make one answer or another the right answer. So that's a case in which I think we should accept realism about the matter. Either really theism is true or really atheism is true. But I'm really pessimistic about the possibility of resolving fundamental disagreement. If that's,
I mean, sorry,
go
I
ahead.
do absolutely appreciate that there is a distinction here between the metaphysical questions and the epistemological questions, and I guess the way that I phrased the worry was more epistemological. But I don't think that they're completely independent from each other either. If we switch from the God example to, let's say, the cosmological multiverse, right? Let's imagine there are parts of the universe very, very far away that we can never observe, but we think that there is a fact of the matter about whether or not they're there. Whether or not I can convince anyone else is less important to me than how do I even decide for myself what to think about this? Or how could I, in principle, decide if I were granted omniscience, if I were granted the ability to see things that are further away than the speed of light lets me look, then I could actually answer the question about how do I decide whether or not there's a multiverse or not. But with the moral questions, I don't even see an in-principle way of adjudicating these, even just amongst myself. We forget about convincing anyone else. Like, how do I know when my intuitions point in different ways? How do I know objectively and definitively what the right answer is? How could I possibly know? Not realistically, but in potential. How could I know?
Good. I like that way of phrasing the worry. So if I could just maybe tweak it just a little bit,
Yeah.
to see if I'm aligned with what you're really worried about. The thought is this:
Yeah. Okay. So this got into the cosmological multiverse, and I don't know how long it's going to continue. So I guess maybe we do have to continue another time. So I'll watch some more of this and see if this is worth continuing to review in another video. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to new content. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. This was a pretty good time, and I got to go make dinner now. So I will catch y'all later. Do like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check the links in the description. You could watch the original video for this. So you could go give Sean Carroll's Mindscape over here on YouTube a subscribe, but it's also a podcast, I believe, so you could find it elsewhere. Check out Russ Shafer-Landau's book. I gave a link in the channel at one point. It's called The Moral Universe. So it's out. you may have heard in the video, he's working on it. But no, it came out, so you can go check it out. So it's going to express precisely the kinds of views that I argue against. And so it's important for you to get an alternative perspective from my own. So go check that out. So I also, they're not here to hear this, but thanks to Sean and Russ for having such a friendly conversation, a very chill conversation, a good back and forth here. I think they have a good rapport. I was very happy to listen to this conversation. I do find many of the things that Russ said objectionable. Like I disagree with what he said, but I like his demeanor and his way of laying things out. I think he's careful to present things in a clear and digestible way. He makes the appropriate caveats and qualifiers. So I like a lot of what he had to say here, despite my disagreements with it. I like a lot of what Sean had to say, despite my disagreements. I think he's like, for instance, I'm not fully on one side or the other here. I think Sean makes too many concessions to anti-realists. I don't think this last argument he presented is a very strong or clear objection to realism. And so, I would encourage Sean to reconsider, actually being like, I think he's not enough of an anti-realist. But of course I would think that. So, but still, thanks to both of them for producing this content, giving us all something to examine. And thanks everybody in the chat for being here. This was a quiet one, but that's okay. Sometimes it's okay to have that kind of quiet one. It's not one where I like feel compelled to stop and talk to everybody in the audience. So we actually got through a big chunk of the video, maybe all of it. So I will see you all next time. Take care, everybody.